Hi everybody, this week an easy hand-carved wooden logo. Stick with us. This is going to be a great little project if you happen to have a logo or some branding or even just a graphic image that you really like, to be able to hand carve this into a piece of wood. Now, I'm just using scraps of aspen that I happen to have in stock, but a soft piece of wood like pine or poplar would work really well here. And because my image is a little bit bigger, I had to glue a couple pieces together to give me a board that was wide enough. And we'll just get rid of the wax paper, and we'll cut it into a square shape that I know will fit the printed logo. And that's all that this really is just a printed image that you'll wind up spray gluing down to the wood. Now, if your graphic image happens to be square or rectangular, you don't need to do this next step, but because mine is round, I'm going to put a screw right dead center on this board, and then it'll pivot around this bandsaw blade to help me cut as close to a perfect circle as I can get. And it actually comes out really well if you use this technique. Now I'm going to just lightly spray some spray glue on my graphic image, because ultimately I'm going to try to remove this paper from the wooden form. But you could actually just load it up with glue and put it on the wood and just carve right through the paper, although I'm not going to do that. But it's something you can do, and then you would just have to sand off the paper. Now the next step is to cut a line around the perimeter of your graphic. And I really recommend you get yourself one of these steel mesh safety gloves so that when you're working with the knife or one of the other gouges, you don't take off your nail or the tip of your finger. But this glove really comes in handy. And really, we're going to go around the entire outline of this graphic image, because we're going to ultimately gouge out the inside, what would be black pieces to this graphic on this board. And once we're able to cut a outline around the graphic, we're going to start to scoop out the wood in the middle. And I mentioned I lightly sprayed some glue on here so that I could pull my graphic off, but it's not that big of a deal. If it's difficult for you to get off, we'll just sand it off when you're all done. Now, because I've got that outline cut in with a knife, the next step is to use a V-gouge to deepen the channel around the outside perimeter of that graphic. And that's going to help when we use the next gouge. But let's talk about tools for a minute. And I want to take a second and invite you to subscribe to our little channel and hit the bell notification icon. It helps our channel grow. And when you do that, you become an immediate honorary member of the Flatwood Society. Now I'm going to wind up using 3 tools basically to create this entire design. And we'll start off with a straight knife, and I've got a couple different shapes that I'm going to use. And then we'll move into a V gouge, which will help us carve that channel. And then there's a U-shaped gouge, which is really going to take out a lot of material. But you don't have to spend a lot of money to get started. You can find these starter carving sets for about 13 bucks at a couple of different craft stores. So again, since I've cut that perimeter, I'm using the V-gouge to deepen the channel. And now I can get in and use the U-shaped gouge to really remove some material. And because I had cut that channel around the perimeter, my U-shaped gouge will butt up against where that channel was cut and typically not go any further, so I don't run a risk of damaging the outside edges of this drawing. That's the benefit of cutting the V channel first. And this U-shaped gouge really pulls out a lot of material here, which is important because I want it to be relatively deep, because I'm going to fill this up with colored epoxy. Now, you don't have to do the epoxy step. You could take shallow cuts and just use different colors of paint to fill in what you've carved out, and that'll make it easier to sand as well. But I like the look of epoxy, and I happen to have a couple of different colors to mix in as well. So for my logo, I'm going to use a light colored blue, very similar to the color of my gloves here. And this is just craft mica powder that you can add to the epoxy, mix it up, and it becomes slightly translucent. I also like this bronze color, and the bronze is really going to look great as the handle on my wood plane. I've also got some black powder, and that will fill up the body of the block plane. Now, one of the things I'm going to try to do is overfill each one of these little cutouts so that the epoxy sits just a little bit higher than the surface of the wood, and that'll make it easier to sand down. Now, if you chose to use paint, that'll be pretty simple. First of all, you didn't need to go as deep on the gouging, but it'll be really easy to sand off if you splashed a little paint on the surface. Now, while everything was drying, I took a break, and we got more than 2 feet of snow in the backyard, but it kind of drifted into some pretty cool patterns with the wind. After a good 24 hours, the epoxy was hard, and then I could get everything over to the belt sander to grind down the high spots. And after some grinding, we'll wind up moving it over to the vacuum table, and ultimately I worked it down to 220 grit paper to get it nice and smooth on the surface. And now with some spray lacquer, gloss, it's going to take 3 coats, and it'll make it actually really nice and shiny. And it looks great hanging on the door to the wood shop. I think this is a pretty easy project. It's a little challenging if you've never used wood carving tools before, but I think anybody can do this. It's going to be a great result.